In this presentation, I want to give you a little update about what's going on astrologically right now. We're living in very exciting and dynamic times. Astrologically, we often see powerful aspects and between the planets, etc. And so we can almost say that we're always in something of a dramatic time. But looking at things, especially in this 2017 universal 1 year, we can recognize that yes, we're in fact at a blast off point, as I illustrated earlier in December in my one of my first presentations I posted on YouTube. And I was talking a lot about the year 2017 as 1 year and how it would be a launch point for a brand new cycle. And wow, it's going to be big. And we're right in it right now. I mean, we have the new President Trump and everything going on over there, and it's very exciting and entertaining on its own ground. But it's also symbolic. It's symbolic of the changes we're seeing. And astrology, if anything, is very much about synchronicity. There's much more to it, but synchronicity is a key word. And that means that we're seeing outer reflections in terms of events in the major sort of what we see in the charts. And that's what astrology is all about. We see this on an individual level, we see this on a collective level. So while one could point at about anything, we can go with what we're looking at here as some major shifts of energy in the world. And everybody's wondering what's going to happen next. And what type of, are we going to go back to sort of a business as usual? And the answer is probably no. Again, because we're in a 1 year and that's a basic theme there. But astrologically, there's a lot going on, and take your pick as to what you want to focus on. I mean, you can go crazy. But I want to bring special attention to certain things. And one of them more specifically is Pluto here. This is Pluto, and it's at the apex point between Uranus and Jupiter. Now, Uranus just so happens to be conjunct Mars right now, and that is very significant itself. So we can recognize that. But more specifically, although Mars moves quickly and Venus too, although Venus is retrograde, and today, by the way, this is March the 4th, we're just less than about 12 hours away here from the half moon, the half waxing moon after the solar eclipse in Pisces on the 26th. So we're, in that halfway point, and often whatever will occur is already brewing. So what you're experiencing now, today, and over the past week are at least reflections of what that new moon seed was all about for you, etc. Now, more specifically, though, I wanted to look at the big picture. We'll look at a little bit of the smaller picture as well as we go, but the bigger picture. The bigger picture, of course, puts the little picture in context. So astrologically, in Western astrology, we do use and look at the far planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And by looking at those, we get the big frame of the contextual backdrop. And what's so exciting and huge is we have, again, Uranus in opposition to Jupiter. That means they're 180 degrees apart, and both of them are in a very close square to Pluto. So this is known as the apex point. Whatever planet sits at the apex point of an opposition is what's called the T-square point, and they're in what's called cardinal signs. Jupiter in Libra, Aries for Uranus, and Pluto is in Capricorn. Over here is Cancer. Those are the four cardinal signs. Cardinals can be equated to king or action, new beginning, very powerfully assertive, very male, you might say, where the fixed signs are more female, and maybe the mutable signs would be deemed more a mix of the two. But in any case, there's a very dynamic charge in cardinal signs. Now, so Pluto here has been in Capricorn already since 2008. And when Obama came in and as the president, that was a very unprecedented moment, of course, the type of president he has been and just his background, etc. But the main point also is that Pluto in Capricorn has and will continue to bring about deep changes and transformations in government. And we can talk about, that at a variety of levels. But what we're seeing is the beginning of the change that's brewing. Uh, we can see this at other levels as well, just thinking about what's going on big in the world. Recently in the news, it was leaked out that one of the main stories is automation and the computer generation coming on fast, and AI, artificial intelligence, and just how we've all known it's here. We're all on using the internet, etc. But how aware are we of what's coming so quickly? And that is that the automation world is moving so fast behind the scenes that the predictions are that within the next 5 years, hordes of people will be out of work because we're being replaced by machinery. And this is a rather scary prospect all on its own, but that's not the main focus. But it is worth mentioning. You see, Pluto will be in Capricorn until 2023. So we still have approximately 6 years to go, and that about encompasses the period of time that I'm referring to. It will bring about big changes, not only governmentally. Capricorn represents government, but also the structure of society and the status quo, the main uh, theme of the mainstream, just what we basically see what's going on. Now, of course, everything's changing all the time, but just in the mainstream sense of things, that, things are pretty much, predictable on the level of, we're not dealing with some extraordinary crisis like first contact or something, although others would argue. The main point is that we have a certain predictability about how life is and what's happening, but we haven't yet experienced the full impact of Pluto. We're beginning to see it now, once again, in this one year, this 2017. And again, with President Donald Trump here to really signify that change, whether we like him or not. He is an example of the change that's really rolling in. And there's no turning back now. So it's a sort of a fasten your seatbelt sort of situation. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, I mentioned this in my newsletter recently, was the root of this particular aspect. Now, particularly, I'm talking about Uranus, Pluto. So even though Jupiter is a fairly far planet and is playing a major role right now, it is moving quite quickly and will already be in Scorpio by October, where Uranus will remain in Aries until 2019 and Pluto in Capricorn until 2023. So you can see how they're forming this square much longer. Now, it is important to note that Uranus and Pluto have just recently, starting back as early as 2011, and I mentioned in my newsletter, more specifically in 2012, began a series of very exact square aspects. And there was 7 in all exact, and there was 2 close, one in 2011 and one actually in January of 2016. So that brought 9 total of aspects between Uranus and Pluto, but they still remain in aspect. And in astrology, we recognize as long as they're within a few degrees, and they are 18 here and 22 here, and we can count the minutes, we basically say, yeah, it's still within orb, so we're still seeing the influence. And moreover, Jupiter comes into the play and forming an exact opposition 22 and 22 with Uranus, where they've been sitting for a while now. And so they kind of pull in Pluto into their particular dynamic. So this is where Pluto again and Uranus start to play another role. Now, what I'm getting at here is that the Pluto-Uranus conjunction occurred back in 1965. So what was really significant, and what I was mentioning both in my newsletter and on Facebook a little bit, I shared the information, was that at that time, October 9th, 1965, in Greenwich. Now, I'm using Greenwich, which we do because it's the 0 hour of the new day, and it's always interesting to know its coordinates are longitude 00 west, but the north latitude is 5129, which is in alignment with the angular, uh, the angle of the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, or the Great Pyramid, but pyramids in general. The particular angle is 51.23 approximately. So that's why Greenwich is so important in the grand, deeper scheme of things. By the way, that wasn't chosen randomly, one would argue. So the main point is that because we have to choose when did this begin as an official day, and what time was it at that place. So we always go back to Greenwich. It's a classical thing to do. And we get sort of a strong core sense of the exact aspect. And what we're looking at here is Uranus-Pluto. Uranus-Pluto conjunction occurred exactly on October 9th, 1965. It just so happens it was 9:11 p.m. at night. That's an interesting little play. And I don't mean to link it so much to the 9/11 events in the United States, so much as, just the whole emergency principle behind it. Now, what I'm getting at is when you look at a conjunction of any two planets, Uranus and Pluto in this case, you ask, it's like taking a freeze frame of the whole sky at that moment. The exact moment that they're conjunct, you take a photograph, so to speak, of the sky. And that's what this chart is. So then we can analyze the chart and say, okay, what are we looking at? What's in this seed? Anytime you have a conjunction of any two planets, that produces like a seed at the beginning of a new cycle. That's why I refer often to the Sun-Moon conjunction, the new moon, as the new moon seed. See, because it's just seeding a very short cycle of 29.5 days, but it still is an important, it's a brick in the wall. Whereas this, a conjunction of these two far planets, is more significant in terms of the fact that we're talking about an approximate 140-year cycle. And so, every 140 years, approximately, Uranus and Pluto conjunct. And I'm going to look more at that later, what the next conjunction looks like, what the last conjunction looked like. So we'll get back to that. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is to focus on what was going on in that important 1965 kind of period when we look at the world, and Haight-Ashbury and the hippie movement and the feminist movement, and just a lot of shaking in society, etc. Now, what's really significant there's a bunch of things to be said about this chart. We can go on and on. I like to start with, for example, what was the phase of the moon at that moment? And the moon was just prior to full. That exact moon just prior to, less than 10 degrees from full, is actually described in one particular resource I have as the vision quest. It's a search for self, looking for a deep, clear reflection of who one is. And it also has strong spiritual connotations, and it's linked also to the needs for kind of a soul-searching journey. That's what it really amounts to. Strong soul-searching theme. So there's a soul-searching element in this particular moment in time when Uranus and Pluto were conjunct. And now, what aspect of the soul were we searching? Now, what's interesting is we look simultaneously, we also have a Venus-Mars conjunction. And that's what plays such an important role in this chart. Now, for a few reasons. First of all, the ascendant is Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in Libra, and the sun's in Libra also. Libra is about fairness, justice, equality, etc. Now, whatever planet rules Libra takes on the next level of importance. It's called a dispositor, and it's Venus. Venus conjunct Mars plays, therefore, a very important role, because we go, Venus is in Sagittarius conjunct Mars. So it brought forward that these two, particularly in this whole picture, are playing an important role. Now, what does that mean? What it basically suggests is that Venus and Mars are the proverbial lovers, and they're in the sign of a Sagittarius, which is, by the way, ruled by Jupiter here in Cancer at an early degree. As a matter of fact, what's significant about Jupiter in Cancer is it's exalted, so it's in a strong place. That's a positive thing. But most importantly, Um, uh, it's not the planet of lowest degree. That's what I was wondering. Is it the planet of lowest degree? We asked that question. No, it's in fact Venus. That's where Venus plays another important role in this whole chart. So there's lots of ways one can interpret. And I just did a couple of recent posts, and one of them was called There's Many Types of Readings You Can Have. It provides its own introduction to astrology and to readings that I offer. So I encourage you to go check that out to learn a bit more about that. There's a listing which I'll share more information about at another time. It's called the 22 Keys to Decoding the Chart. And there's more than 22, but it's just a good start point. In any case, Venus is the planet of lowest degree, so it takes on its own particular importance in the chart as sort of the alpha point, the beginning point. So, okay, so we can ask on the other end, just to say, what's the planet of highest degree? Well, it just so happens it's Mercury. Now, why Mercury is important is because A, it's in Libra, which is the chart ruler. Whatever rules this point, the ascendant, is called the chart ruler in Libra with the Sun, which brings an emphasis of that whole theme of Libra, fairness, equality, justice, etc. And disposited by, we ask, what's the ruler of Libra? Oh, Venus. Oh, and Venus is at the point of lowest degree and Mercury at the planet of highest degree. The planets of lowest and highest degree are like the alpha and the omega. They sort of wrap the chart. It's the beginning and the end. Okay, the opening curtain and the closing curtain, if you like. And you can go on with your metaphors there to understand, but that's the basic understanding. So it wraps the whole chart. So the themes that they represent are figuring prominently. So what I'm getting at there then is that it was the beginning, not surprisingly, or a very key turning point or activation point in the gender equality revolution that we're seeing right now. Now, I mentioned that in my newsletter, and I've mentioned that for quite a while in my newsletters, going back to 2011, 2012, when Uranus and Pluto were forming those dynamic squares, and they started that series of 9 that occurred subsequently. The reason I was mentioning it is because I was pointing indirectly, although I did mention it in the past, to the whole ISIS movement, the whole patriarchal male dominance. Many people will agree that the world's changing quickly and what's rising is the feminine. But more specifically, we could just say on a very social level is gender equality. It's still not there yet, but it is moving and pushing hard. And this is causing its own challenges in society. It's true in the economic and employment sphere. However, it's probably, a necessary thing. I wouldn't certainly by any means call it a necessary evil. I would call it a return to the natural way it sort of should be. In other words, if we think of yin and yang or positive and negative electrons, we can go on and on. The notion of one gender higher than another really is the beginning of a lot of problems. Might is right comes to the fore, and in an intellectual age like we're in, that no longer is valid. So what we're seeing, and it's a very important revolution, is the gender equality revolution, which I again think is one of the most important in the world, because with that comes a new level of relating, a new level of regarding one another, a new level of respect, a new level of interaction. It's not going to erase the romance dance between people. Hopefully not, of course. We want still men to be men and women to be women, but with absolutely equal rights on every front, and the sharing of power, neither to see simply men or simply women there, and just a full-fledged sharing of power. And certainly we do, whether it's in our country alone, we see premiers of provinces as women, and we see in other countries women as presidents, and so on. And we will continue to see that as a consequence of this revolution. But what I'm partially hinting at, and have been all along, is again that ISIS movement. And I don't mean to judge anybody. It's not for me to say who should be doing what, really. But I am mentioning because I believe it to be sort of at least an expression of, or an echo of, the urge and desire to put things the way they were with a male dominant society. I think that's a very core feature of what is important to these people, that they are feel threatened by the new way of things. They want things to be the way they were, and they're using a sort of political, military, political, religious kind of weave. That's the basics. I mean, I'm not an expert in these things as such. I don't pretend to be, but I am, we're all aware that it's there and it's not going away. And we're dealing with a lot of the, whole racial issue on the planet, which is still very loud, and that is quite unfortunate, certainly, but it's where we're at. And whether we're talking about prejudice of various religions or nationalities, etc., but religion in particular is playing an important role here. But I believe that when we look at the natural order of things versus the religious, socially, politically contrived order of things, we come back to an equality principle. We don't see a man as God or God as man. It's not a male God principle. It's not a thing like that. That such thinking misses the point. It's like, how could we absolutely, ever do such a thing as to think that God would be like a gender? How limiting. But people still buy that. We still refer often to this notions of its higher power, this source of existence, etc., as a him. And now I'm a man. You think I might be almost wanting to defend that, but I certainly don't. I think it's a very ridiculous and very limiting, and in fact, I think it's socially damaging. And so we're in a healing phase in that regard, and that's what I'm basically getting at. Now, and this is showing up in this chart in another couple of ways. In this chart, we see Chiron and Saturn really high in the chart. So ask, what's the planet of highest elevation? We have the planet of lowest and highest degree, but what's the planet of highest elevation? And it's Saturn, but we have to kind of pull in Chiron here because, well, they're not exact, well, they're rather conjunct. It's a bit wide, and they are 10 and 11th house in this particular tropical zodiac with the Placidus house system, by the way, which is the most commonly used, and for good reason, because it works probably the best. But mainly that they're close enough, and both in Pisces, and they're both hovering around this high point of the chart. So that's a healing theme, and Saturn represents, in Pisces, Saturn's kind of like karma. The karmic planet in the karmic sign is often the description given to Saturn in Pisces. So it's kind of a double whammy. So we're carrying this karma. And Saturn is at this particular degree of Pisces represents kind of hard emotions. It represents this notion that we've, for whatever reason, have developed hard emotions along the way, and sort of a less than empathetic and compassionate mindset. And Chiron in there is playing a role of saying, we need to heal this. And this is corroborated in other ways, partially by the fact that Pisces is ruled by Neptune, which is here. Now, Neptune at 18 degrees in Scorpio is actually an almost exact sextile in this case to Uranus Pluto. So it's been pulled in a very good way. Sextiles are generally considered very positive. And it's new perceptions. It represents the theme of new perceptions. So looking historically, we see clearly that the entire revolutions of the 1960s, 1965, Haight-Ashbury, the whole women's lib movement, etc., has been effective. It has worked, and we have seen from this seed event that we've experienced, the progression of society to create a state of equality in the way we're referring to. And there's other levels. There's many levels that you can approach astrology with. I can go into the Sabian symbols. We can go look at the I Ching, in fact, because it has a corresponding theme behind it. But we won't do those. We'll leave those alone for now, just leaving it to this main point that I wanted to clarify mostly, that I've written it again in my newsletter for quite a while, and most recently, again, I brought it up. So I wanted to just clarify it without being so, hard tasked to write it out, which I often do partially because people don't understand astrology. And if I show them a chart, it's all bewildering and overwhelming at worst. But, maybe in another one soon, in fact, I'll give you a little lesson in astrology so you're kind of more up to speed on what the planetary symbols are and how that you can recognize them pretty quick after all. It's basically a language and you can understand better. Oh, now I know why the certain things are being said, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Now, what's interesting, why I mentioned Jupiter was important, and it doesn't show in this chart actually. See this, this is called the north node. You've heard there's a north and south node of the moon. Now, it's not actually showing, it should be, but in this chart, it's not being indicated. I could change that quickly, but I'll leave it for now, is that it's at 7 degrees, and the opposite point would be exactly at 7 degrees. So there, the south node would be conjunct Venus and Mars. It actually makes me, now that I think about it, want to do that. This is an astrology chart where we can go into the displayed points very quickly here and edit it. And I'm just going to make sure that the south nodes include. These are various points, by the way. All of these points could be added to the chart. There's quite a few. We don't. They're secondary. They're very important. These are the asteroids, but I won't go into that too much. But the main point is for now that you can see, wow, there sure is a lot of points that we can add to this chart, and it's yes. So this is what I want to show you is there it is now. Venus, Mars conjunct the south node. When you have planets conjunct the south node, it's kind of suggesting it's almost like too much of a good thing. It's like the cup runneth over. It's not negative per se, but there is the need to clear some of it. And what it is in part is Sagittarius is very much linked to beliefs. Um, Often people give beliefs to Pisces. I don't. In astrology, I give it to Sagittarius. It's more Pisces might be I believe. I can imagine that. It's slightly different, ironically, to say I believe versus belief. Okay, it's like a belief is like a suspension of a suspension of one's normal consciousness for a moment to say I can believe that, or I believe in this. But what's your belief? It's more anchored, it's more core, it's more conditioned. It's more ingrained in your whole perception of reality. So anyway, the main point is that the planets conjunct the south node mean there's too much of something. And Venus-Mars conjunction on one hand, there's different levels of interpretation, but it's actually a complicated aspect for a variety of reasons. But it does usually show up in the charts when new relationships are coming in. So that's on its own ground true. But mainly, it does indicate too much of something. And it goes back. It's almost like with Jupiter in Cancer, and then the moon up here, by the way, is in Aries, which is a ruler of Mars. And what it's suggesting is that it's too much of this casual notion of things being sort of so-called comfortable for some people the way they were in terms of the status quo of men being dominant and in charge and put up and shut up and might is right and all that. And while the roots of that revolution, the feminist revolution, goes further back in time, there more recently were in the 1960s really revived and right on cue in alignment with this particular revolutionary aspect. Okay, so there's more to say about this chart. There truly is. You can go on and on with any chart as basically indicated, but I'm going to move back to the now once again. So way back in 1965 was the conjunction in the most recent round, the cycle of Uranus-Pluto having 140 years, and about 2104 there'll be a new 140-year cycle, and we can go back to when the previous one occurred prior to that, which is of course in the 1800s, basically, Now it was about, it doesn't matter. For now, we'll leave that alone. We won't go into what it implied because we get too historical. But in the now of things, and we go back specifically, interestingly enough, when the exact first Uranus-Pluto square occurred. You see, the square represents it's like the half moon, which we're about to experience. In fact, it's the half moon from the new moon is like spring equinox to winter solstice. It's basically that midpoint where it's the turning point. So when we go winter solstice to spring equinox, we have winter. Then we go, the turning point exactly is spring equinox, which would mean the beginning of spring. So it's the beginning of spring in that regard between these two aspects. So that's where the Uranus-Pluto square that started in 2012, October about, indicated the spring or the new season. If you were to break any cycle into four, you'd have four seasons, actually, and it works exactly like that. And so the spring season of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction represents the new beginning, the new ground, but we're still so early in it. It might as well be, March 24th. It's really not far, even less. We're really early in the spring of this new cycle, this theme. I mean, in the new season of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, we're just might as well be, in fact, probably March 22nd, where spring would in fact occur on March 21st. So you have to, make that ratio shift in time to understand that, the opposition, for example, of Pluto Uranus, which would be like the beginning of summer, won't occur for, another, approximately 50 years, really, another 50 or so years. I didn't quite look at that at this point, it wasn't my main focus, but it'll take 50 years, just like it has basically since 1965 to this date, 52 years, but we're going back to 2012. So it's about 50, just shy of 50 years, right? So 47 or so. So we're about that many years away for the summer season to occur. So we're in the spring, and the spring's when everything begins and starts to move. But if you think of springtime, it's generally in this part of the world anywhere. April, the first month, the month of Aries is usually kind of barren, and there's not much growing, and it's kind of, it takes a while for things to, really show. Then Taurus time comes, and everything flourishes. That's we can actually use the midpoint between the equator and the North Pole, the 45 degrees, as the mean average point, where it'll be different further north and certainly further south. But if we use that as the mean average point for the planet, we get, yes, in fact, the period of Aries in the first month of spring is kind of barren. It's, one can prepare the ground, but you don't do the planting yet. So it's like that. So we're in this early stage of this new cycle. So I wanted to mention that because while there's so many other things going on, we can really recognize that this, revolution is going on, and there's forces that want to it's almost by its very the nature of the beast that they want to stop it. They want to slow it down, and they want to hold it back. It's almost I don't know, an impulsive nature almost. It's something that's hard to explain. It's archetypal practically, that there'll always be those forces that want to push forward and those want to pull back. And it's hard to know what to say. And, it's just one way of looking at ISIS on its own ground, and or any other organization in the world, by the way, any other that is oriented to sort of a male dominant perspective. Any other or person or group or nation or anything that has this notion of superiority and the inequality, etc. And we can see that in different factions, and there's a lot of reactions going on in this way and that out there. And they have, we have white supremacists, for example, be very male dominant, etc. So, they're not pretty, these groups usually. So you can get a clearer sense of what you're seeing. It's all about this gender revolution, which is destined to occur, destined to come to a new place of balance, as in the previous slide, the Mercury Sun in Libra indicated. That was what made them so important. They said, we are going to, by destiny, achieve that balance. It's going to happen. But we're going to have to, it's going to take time for us to acclimatize ourselves as people individually, societally, internationally, etc., to come to this clear, unequivocal uh, conviction that that's just the way it's supposed to be. It's like, duh. It should have almost been to think it could be otherwise or back to what it was is it doesn't seem to almost make sense, but it could. And there's those forces that want to for their own reasons, etc. I won't go into that and speculate too much. Now, okay, there's a lot there, a lot of information, but it's a main theme focus, okay? And it's just a quick, actually, even though it's been about half an hour here, to get a clear sense, a bit of indication of some of how astrology works, but also to really clarify that theme. Now, the one other that I did want to mention now is just because we're there. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make another because it's that important, but we're looking at Saturn conjunct the galactic center. I'm going to leave you on that note right there so you don't have to, go and do something else and maybe come back to the other presentation, which will be more focused on that. Okay, thanks for watching and see you soon.